give you the statement, Detective Stone?
Yes.
Okay. Alrighty, I think, did I give you the right thing? Okay, let me hand you this statement back, and page 25, lines 22 to 24. Can you refresh your recollection on what Sandy told you about how he perceived this action of pulling the knives out of his pockets?
Okay.
Oh, and has that refreshed your recollection?
Yes.
Okay.
What line were you refreshing?
22 to 24.
What did Defendant Sandy tell you about how he interpreted that movement by Mr. Boyd?
In his statement, he said he took a defensive posture.
Okay, and what does a defensive posture mean to you?
Means that you're standing in a way, getting ready to fight someone.
Okay, and what is offensive posture?
Kind of the same thing, just getting ready to fight with somebody.
Okay, and what you talked yesterday about show of force versus use of force that police officers have, and what did you say about when a police officer is pointing his gun at the ground? What is that called?
It's a low ready.
But as far as a show of force versus a use of force, what did you say that was?
It's a show of force.
Okay, and then you said even if the police officer points his gun at you, what is that?
That's a show of force.
Okay, is a defensive posture similar to a show of force?
I believe so.
Okay. How many times had Mr. Boyd, based on your investigation, pulled out his knives in that same position over the course of the 2 hours and 45-minute encounter with APD?
Several times.
Okay. What things would prompt him to do that, to pull out his knives like that?
The majority of the times it was when the discussion about him relinquishing the knives from his actual body, not just putting them in his pockets. When the request would come to take the knives out of his pockets and put them on the ground away from his person, whenever that discussion would come up from any officer, is when he would become very irate, and he would pull them out and speak about killing them.
Okay. Was it the same kind of motion each time?
It's hard. I never actually saw the video, but from what the officers described, yes.
Okay. And what would happen when they, he didn't keep them out the whole, well, let me ask you, what would he eventually put them away?
In his pockets, with the blade still out, yes.
And is this thing, as far as what happened with the open space officers at the beginning when you interviewed them, what did they tell you about whether he pulled the knives out in the same way when they dealt with him?
He did it the same exact way.
Okay. When they moved back, and we showed that picture yesterday, what did Mr. Boyd do when they moved back away from him?
He started rambling on about incoherent things, and at times would, again, with the blades out, put the knives in his pockets.
Did he chase after them?
No.
Oh.
Well, I mean, he had advanced on him a little bit, but then he would back off.
Okay. Did he ever try to slash at them with a knife or do anything like that?
No.
Careful about the phone question.
Okay, Judge. Did you ask Defendant Sandy what he saw right before he shot Mr. Boyd?
Yes.
Okay, let me find that for you. Do you recall what he said, sir?
I'd have to refresh my memory.
I'm going to ask you to review page 26, lines 11 through 25, please, first.
You said lines 11 through 25?
Yes, sir. What's designated there, clip 8?
And you want me to try and recite this whole thing from memory, or what would you like me to do?
I'm going to ask you to say what he saw right before he shot him, what motion Mr. Boyd made right before he shot him.
Read it to yourself in the letter that we're doing.
Okay. So the question is, what did he tell you he saw right before he fired the first shot?
He said he saw James Boyd square off with him, and then he started to turn left in order to flank them, and as he was turning to the left is when he fired.
Okay, and then does he say that he fired a second shot?
Yes.
And then what did he say he saw right before he fired the third shot?
If I could refresh my memory again.
Sure.
He said right before he fired the third shot?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Said he was still standing.
Still standing, and is that why he fired the third shot? Is that what he said to you?
He said he was still standing and he fired the third shot.
Okay. Just for a second. Where did he say that he aimed his bullet?
I'm going to have to refresh my memory. Okay. Held center mass.
Okay. I think you explained that to the jury yesterday about where center mass is. Would a person firing at center mass, well, let me ask another question. What kind of rifle was Defendant Sandy using?
.223.
And how would you describe that rifle as far as the power of the .223?
The power of it, I guess I'm not understanding the question.
I was thinking high-powered versus low-powered rifles. Maybe there isn't a low-powered rifle.
I'm just going to object to this point. He testified yesterday he was not a firearms expert. And the question, power of a rifle, is pretty vague, Your Honor.
If the witness has the knowledge, we can describe the kind of rifle.
I think he did that, Your Honor.
If you can give what you can, then it's different. Or if he has the knowledge.
Go ahead, Detective Stone.
It is considered a high-powered rifle. That is correct.
And what does that mean, high-powered rifle?
It's just a higher caliber rifle. The bullet will travel a longer distance and more accurately than, say, like a pistol round.
And what kind of bullets were in Mr. Sandy's gun?
.223.
And were they the soft point bullets that you talked about?
Yes.
Objection asked and answered, Your Honor, yesterday.
Would a person
I'm going to allow that question. I don't think it's that.
would a person firing a .223 rifle at center mass with soft point bullets understand that doing that had a risk of death or great bodily harm to the person they were aiming at?
Well, yes, that is, yes.
And was this did you try to determine in your statement whether this was an accidental shooting or a mistake, or was done intentionally?
I didn't uncover any evidence that this was an accident or unintentional.
Okay. And did you actually, in Defendant Sandy's statement, did he make a statement that this was intentional?
I don't know if he used those words, but I have to refresh my memory.
Let me hand this to you again. This is on the same page. This is 26, lines 5 through 7. Does that refresh your recollection?
Yes.
And what did he say about whether he made a decision to shoot Mr. Boyd?
He said he made the decision to shoot.
And that, in investigating a homicide, indicates what as far as a person's intent?
His intent was to shoot James Boyd.
Okay. All right, Judge, we're at a good stopping place. If you want to break, or do you want me to continue on?
I want to remind you, courts 8 and 9. I'm not sure those are addressed.
What? I'm sorry, Judge.
Courts 8 and 9 questions.
Oh, we're not done with him. I'm going to get to it when we get to the part about Mr. Boyd, if this is a good time to break.
Go about 30 minutes.
I can do that, Judge. Okay, I was thinking it was later than it was. I'm sorry, Judge. In either of the statements, either in March or April, First of all, did you give Mr. Boyd the chance to say anything he wanted to say to you during those statements?
Mr. Boyd was dead.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's been a long week. I'm sorry, Detective Stone. Did you give Defendant Sandy the chance to say anything he wanted to say to you during those times?
Yes.
Okay. Did he ever tell you in either of those two statements about going to church before he came to out to the foothills?
I don't recall that.
Okay. Never mentioned that?
I don't know.
All right. Let's go to March 16th, 2014.
Before you move on to the 16th, I'm going to ask that you approach to
Okay.
the fourth exhibit.
Can you explain to the jury what the term squaring off, what you understood Mr. Defendant Sandy to be saying when he said he squared off to him?
Squared off like face to face. You know, not running away, not turning around, but squaring off like if you've seen a boxing match when two boxers are about to go at it, they square off on each other. That's how he explained it, and that's how I took it.
Okay, he didn't say that, you just demonstrated with his hands up like he was going to punch. Did he demonstrate that for you?
Objection, lady. And testifying before the question.
Oh, I don't think so, Judge. Yeah, thanks. That's not something, is that what Defendant Sandy showed you, that he put his hands up in a fist like this?
I don't believe that's what he showed me, but I was asking me to explain what squared off. So I was explaining squared off.
Okay. What is the best evidence of what Mr. Boyd did before the shooting happened?
I'm going to object, Your Honor.
I'm going to sustain the objection.
Okay. Is there a video of what happened right before Mr. Boyd was shot?
There's a video.
Okay. And then what did you understand Defendant Sandy to be saying when he said that he turned to his left, and what did you say? Thought he was flanking?
Yeah, so the term flanking is kind of came from a military term, so I have a military background. It's when you don't want to come at someone straight on, you can either move to the right and try to come at them from the right or come at them from the left, like in an attacking position. So you would flank from the right and try to get them on their right side, or flank to the left, try to get them on their left side, or try to, flank all the way around to the rear. So that's what flank means.
Okay. And did you ask Defendant Sandy to explain what he meant by flanking?
No.
Defendant Sandy was he in the military?
I don't know if he was or not.
Okay. Let's go to March 16th, 2014, when you got called out to the scene.
Okay.
Did you know anything about what was happening with Mr. Boyd before you were called out to the scene after the shooting?
No.
How did you get called out to the scene?
I was called by radio control since I was the on-call homicide detective, and I was advised of the officer-involved shooting.
At the time you arrived, where was Mr. Boyd?
Mr. Boyd had already been transported to the hospital.
Had he died yet by the time you got to the scene?
No.
So can you take the jury through what you did when you arrived at the scene to try to preserve evidence and start directing people to preserve evidence at the scene?
Sure. So when I arrive on scene, I try to seek out whoever the primary officer or whoever the on-scene supervisor is, just to kind of get a sense of what's going on. When I arrived at Pedro Vista, I saw that some open space vehicles were up on that main trail that we have been talking about at west of U Mound, and had their lights oriented up near where James Boyd's camp was. So to me, that was an indicator that whatever was going on had happened up there. So the next thing I did was, once my assisting investigators started arriving, because this is a team effort, with evidence collection, witness interviews, neighborhood canvassing, I can't, and search warrants need to be issued if there's arrest warrants that need to be issued. I can't do all that on my own, so I have assisting detectives that will come out. The best way to get everybody on the same page is we have what we called what we call a primary briefing, and that consists of myself, my secondary homicide investigator, several other investigators from violent crimes, would be the robbery unit, the sex crimes unit, the domestic violence unit, so on and so forth, missing persons, and a member from the district attorney's office. If there is a death that has occurred, someone from the office of the medical investigator, as well as the violent crime supervisor. And we all get together in the briefing van, and once we're ready to brief, we bring in one of the primary officer who did the initial investigation, and he tells us what occurred, what they responded to, kind of what happened, and what they found out throughout their investigation until we arrived on scene.
Okay. Who was present at the initial briefing at the scene of the shooting?
Again, all of my investigators were there. Deputy Assistant District Attorney Debbie DiPaolo was present. Police Chief Gordon Eden was present. There was a whole slew of other investigators that were present. I don't have all their names off the top of my head.
Okay. Who conducted the initial briefing?
As far as who briefed us?
Yes, sir.
Two people briefed us initially. The first one was Sergeant Jason Carpenter, who was the on-scene supervisor, and he's the one that kind of gave us the layout of what happened, the initial response from the open space officers, their response, and then kind of the response of the rope team and the tactical units thereafter. And he gave us just kind of a general brief description of where everybody was standing at the different times that was going on. And then after he gave us the briefing, K-9 officer Scott Weimer-Skirch came in and briefed up the portion kind of leading up to the shooting.
Okay. Is that unusual that a witness or someone who was involved in the shooting would give the briefing to the officers conducting the investigation? Yeah,
so that's kind of my fault. I did not realize that K-9 officer Scott Weimer-Skirch was so intimately involved in the shooting. That is not a common practice of mine. If a witness officer or someone who is involved in the apprehension that resulted in the shooting, I typically will not use them as the person to brief me there right at that time. However, I did not realize until after he briefed me just how involved he was. So it is not customary for me to do that.
Okay. Why is that not a good police investigative practice, to have a person involved in the shooting be the one that briefs you on what happened?
Well, again, because he's a witness and because he was a part of it, it's better to actually sit them down and have a formal recorded interview with them where he can provide a statement, questions can be asked, he can answer those questions, and it gives me time to think about what I need to ask him and things of that nature, instead of him coming and just kind of talking about it in an open forum. I mean, it's not something that should be done, even not in an officer-involved shooting, just in a regular citizen homicide investigation.
You'd never allow a citizen involved in a shooting or a witness to the shooting to debrief you on what happened, would you?
Right.
Would you ever allow a civilian to ever do that in a similar situation?
Well, the purpose of the briefing is to give a law enforcement account of the investigation that has happened after the incident occurred to when I show up. So the briefing is supposed to be about the initial investigation. It's not supposed to be a witness interview. So again, not knowing that K-9 officer Scott Weimer-Skirch was so involved, I shouldn't have had him brief me as to an investigation when he was a witness.
Where were defendants Sandy and Perez during the briefing to everybody at the scene?
They were in two different vehicles.
And I think we've already established no one took their statements before they left the scene.
Objection needed, Your Honor, and asked and answered.
Were their statements taken before they left the scene, Detective Stone?
No.
What processing was done of them at the scene?
So again, the criminalistics detectives will bring in each officer at a time and will take photographs just like I had explained, and they will go over what equipment they have on them and go over their firearms.
What time were they allowed to leave?
They were allowed to leave. I don't exactly know when they left because I was conducting my investigation, but I believe they left sometime after they were processed.
Can you give an estimate of time?
No, I can't.
What time did the shooting take place?
Shooting took place right around 7:30.
Does that help refresh your recollection about how many hours later the shooters were allowed to leave?
It was 3 or 4 hours.
Okay. What time did you find out that Mr. Boyd had died?
Probably around that same time, 3 or 4 hours later.
In your initial briefing, did you learn about the different 3 or 4 different waves of officers who had arrived? Were you given that overview?
Yes.
Okay. And let me hand you what's marked as States 20. Did you in your notes do sort of a summary of when people arrived as well to help yourself keep track of this?
Yes.
Let me hand you what's been marked as States Exhibit 20, 20B, which is not something that you created, but
No.
have you reviewed that summary to determine whether the arrival times are correct for the various waves of officers?
Yes. Yes.
And in that particular summary, does it tell you who arrived during what particular groups, what particular time periods?
Yes.
Your Honor, I've moved 20B into evidence.
Objection, argument, vote.
And just so the jury knows what we're talking about up there, 20B, can you describe for them what 20B shows?
So on the left-hand column, you have what's labeled arrival times, and it's in military times. So
Hey, can you tell everybody how we figure out what layperson time is with military time?
Yeah, I was going to do that.
Okay.
So 1641 to 1648, that's going to be 4:41 p.m. to 4:48 p.m. And it's showing the arrival of the 2 open space officers, John McDaniel and Patrick Hernandez. The next column, 1705 to 1726, that's going to be 5:05 p.m. and 5:26 p.m. And you're going to see the arrival times within that span of time. Officer Monet, Niprath, Virgilio, Chris Ware, and Wetterland, and Jason Carpenter. And then sometime within that is when State PD Officer Mitch Bankston arrives. And I'm sorry, I don't know if I said Sergeant Chris Ware from State Police. And in the next section, 1752 hours to 1835 hours, that's going to be 5:52 to 6:35 p.m. And you're going to have Detectives Keith Sandy, K-9 Officer Scott Weimer-Skirch, Rick Ingram. I don't know why that says.
That should be an R rather than a...
Yeah, so this is going to be Rick Ingram.
Let me change that to an R on here. Okay.
SWAT Officer Jeff McFarland, K-9 Officer Kenneth Ronzone, SWAT Sniper Jim Perdue, and SWAT Officer Anthony Sedler.
Okay.
And then in the last column here, the three SWAT team members that came kind of at the very, right before the scene came to a conclusion. 1911 hours to 1929 hours, which was 7:11 to 7:29 p.m. You have SWAT officers Ramon Ornelas, Dominic Perez, and SWAT Sergeant Jim Fox.
Were all of these officers still there at the time of the shooting? All 19 of them?
Yes.
Okay. Did you also, after all the evidence was gathered by all the people under... well, let me ask, were you the person in charge of this investigation at the time?
Yes, I'm the lead investigator overseas and is ultimately responsible for the outcome of the investigation.
After you gathered all this information, did you create a summary of the officers and all the different kinds of equipment that they had out there at the scene?
As far as the equipment they had on them, I didn't create a summary, no.
Or did you review a summary that had
Yes.
everything created of all of the equipment that they had to make sure that it was accurate and accurately reflected all the guns they had?
Yes.
All the ammo they had?
Yes.
And all the non-lethal devices that they had?
Yes.
Let me hand you to Martha States 22. Can you tell the jury what that is, please?
Yeah, this seems to be a graph of the equipment that they had on them. This came from the criminalistics report. I had reviewed this in the past. I mean, it does appear accurate.
Okay. And you also had access to the photographs to be able to see the photographs of the actual weapons and how much ammunition there actually was for each particular gun. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Your Honor, I would move... I'm sorry. Detective Stone, can you tell me what the exhibit number is, please?
22.
22 into evidence.
Objection to the approach, Your Honor.